So the title of my presentation is Are You Listening to Me? And it's a Feminist Participatory Action Research Study. And I want to always thank Professor Ruth Deary and Mavis Kirkham for their supervision and support through the PhD process. So this is a study of the interactions between mothers and midwives when labour begins. And it's a very small focus on our maternity services. But if you want to know why we're banging on about better births, reducing stillbirths, improving outcomes for mothers, this is a snapshot of how current fragmented services affects both mothers and midwives. All the pictures are views from my kitchen window. Bashing on quickly, I'm going to give you some background, some context, the study aims, overview of the study, and most importantly, race to the findings. So the background of this study was that in my clinic as a consultant midwife, repeatedly and increasingly, mothers were saying to me, they didn't believe me, or they didn't believe us. They didn't listen to me. They said I wasn't in labour when I knew I was. They sent me home again. Now, I'm not going to talk about that, other than to say I think you probably all know what that is. Well, I need to go back. I've got a slide missing here. There was a woman, one of the women in my study said, when being asked, when she came to my clinic, that when you're 0 to 4, when you're beyond 4 centimeters dilatation, it's all fine. But if you're 0 to 4, nobody gives a shit. And why is that? It's atrocious, really. So the context of this study, when you're doing a PhD, you need to go back. You think you know things, and you've got to go back, why you know this and why you know that. And so I had to go back to my own biography as a teenage mother in the 70s, and I aligned that with government policy. And we had the Peel report and the Short report and the move from home birth to hospital birth. And I aligned that with midwifery developments, and I'm delighted to see our wonderful Caroline Flint in the audience, because I always think of you when I think of midwifery developments, when we had changing childbirth in 1993, and trying to implement team midwifery and caseloads and sensitive midwifery. And aligning that with the political context came a bit later for me. And if there's one message I want to get out to all of you in this room is midwives need to be politically aware. And it's really important that we understand what's going on with our governments and what's going on with our NHS. Because it is being destabilized and dismantled bit by bit and privatized. So I also, with this context, looked at mothers' expectations and how they've changed over time. So the study overview, very briefly, my theoretical perspective came from a feminist postmodern perspective. Postmodern, for me, meant there are many ways of seeing the truth. Seeing things from a midwifery perspective, seeing things from the mother's perspective, and understanding that there are different ways of interpreting truth. I chose participatory action research because I wanted this study to be meaningful for the mothers and midwives in this study, as well as disseminating findings later on. So the mothers and the midwives in the study were involved at a particular point. And I used a voice-centered relational method called the listening guide, which very briefly involves reading the transcripts at least 4 times. And the first time you're looking at the plot, what is this person saying? And the second time you read it through, you pull out all the I statements. I felt this, I did that, I said this. And you can actually form a poem which allows the respondent to talk about herself, or himself, in this case it was herself, before we talk of them, and so on. And I chose focus groups and in-depth open interviews. So in total, there were 72 participants. I personally interviewed 13 mothers, 7 of whom had had unexpected birth at home. They hadn't planned home birth, hadn't wanted home birth, and were very traumatized as a result of giving birth at home. the term that you will all be very familiar with, BBA, born before arrival. I deliberately didn't use that term in my study because I think it just does not capture the impact that that has on mothers. The other 6 women I had met in my clinics, and I profoundly felt it would help them to be formally interviewed and be involved in the study to help them move forward. And the final part, the collaborative, participatory part of the study, was bringing the mothers and midwives together in a one-day workshop where they could look at preliminary findings and they could come up with their own solutions and recommendations. So the aims of the study were to examine the experience of childbirth with a specific reference to the factors that enhance or inhibit mothers and midwives' interactions when mothers report the onset of labour, and to raise awareness of the implications of unsatisfactory interactions. Excuse me. So I've got straight to the findings now, and this is the findings from the mothers. And it's very easy to package the findings into neat little boxes, but anybody that's done any studying research knows that it's a much messier process. But for the want of delivering, here we go. There were 3 sub-themes with an overarching theme, but they'll all be revealed. So the first one was about, this is the mothers' findings, was about subjugating mothers' knowledge. For example, there were conflicted mothers. Whether I was dilating or not, I was in labour and I was in pain. There were frightened mothers. I don't think you feel safe when you're sent home again. I didn't. And there were stoical mothers, mothers who said, well, thankfully he was born healthily in the end, so it was a success story. But, and as the interview went on, and the more a respondent, a mother, talked about her birth, the more she started to question her own decision-making and the decisions of others that led to the kind of birth that she had that she might have thought could have been different. Then there was undermining confidence and generating fear. And for us as midwives in this room, how easy it is to either smile and welcome women when we first see them, or make them feel intimidated and frightened. Just the look of your face has a massive impact. So there was a fear of, women talked about a fear of uncertainty. I didn't have a clue what was happening, as it was my first time. Doesn't matter what classes, what preparation you do. You can read about learning to drive all you like, but once you get behind the wheel, it's a very different experience. And there was fear of midwives. You're in the hands of that midwife, and so you don't want to miff them off. Now, this mother went on to talk about, well, it's like if you're in a restaurant and you don't like the soup or the soup's cold, you're a bit frightened to say so in case they could take it back to the kitchen and spit in your soup. So women talked about being frightened to either phone up or come in to see their midwife in case their experience and what they were experiencing was derided. And then there was fear for the future. So they said, I wasn't in enough pain. And I thought, gosh, what is enough pain then? And so if this is hurting like this, what is it going to be like down there? And that created a great deal of fear for mothers. And then when mothers gave birth unexpectedly at home, the issue of abandonment and being unsupported when they've had an unexpected birth out of hospital. And I identified abandoned babies. I'm sorry, I've tried to fix this, I just can't because it doesn't come up on my computer. I think it affected my bond with her when I thought she was going to die. And Michelle was talking about the importance of keeping mothers and babies together. But when a woman is giving birth in a place, we know home births are not unsafe, and these women all had normal births, physiological births. But actually that's not what they were planning. And we've done such a good job of terrifying mothers about the safety of out-of-hospital births, that these women genuinely thought their babies would die by giving birth, either in the toilet or out near the front door, one woman by the garden gate trying to get into her car. And so one woman described how she separated herself from her baby because she thought her baby was going to die. And that had big repercussions for her. Then there were abandoned mothers because we weren't providing support. And one mother described, all your deepest, darkest fears just go through your head. And she likened that to her fear of thunderstorms. She was terrified that her husband might fall down the stairs and not be able to help her, when we had said, no, you're fine, stay at home, have a bath, have a paracetamol. And she got in the bath and whoomp, the baby was coming. And the partners of mothers felt abandoned to responsibility. What if something happens to the baby and there's no one there who can help? And one partner described receiving her baby into her hands, into her bare hands. And she said the baby was Dulux white. And she felt, yes, exactly, that was not particularly, the baby came right, but a Dulux white baby was a concern. And this partner of the mother didn't know that. But they talked about their fear and the sense of responsibility as a partner of having to face that fear. So I described this as becoming others and mothers experiencing embodied dissonance. And I want to race on because I want to come back to the dissonance in a minute. Now, here we've got the all the factors that midwives talked about. I don't know if this laser thing works on. I can't do it from here. So anyway, that diagram, these are the things that mothers said would be helpful in a conversation with women over the phone when they were phoning up saying, I think I'm in labor. Just about giving your name, sounding unapproachable, being focused, congratulating on it being a special time. So the midwives knew what made for a positive interaction with mothers. But of course, the clock in the middle is the Achilles heel here in terms of having the time. So what did the midwives say about these interactions? Well, the first theme I identified was interactions as distractions. And when asked what makes for satisfactory and satisfying interactions, the midwives almost without fail said it's having the time to listen and the time to focus in. And they described the conveyor belt. You don't get that luxury on a labor ward. It's like a conveyor belt of mothers. And this midwife was talking, if she was working in a birth center, she might be able to offer, or if she was at home, she would offer the mother to have a lavender bath to help her relax and make her own decision as to whether to stay or whether to go or whether to stay in the bath at home. But she felt she didn't have that luxury on labor ward. And about maternity assessment units or triage, whatever you call them in your area, one of our senior midwives said, well, triage, I hate it. And at best, it's tolerable, and at worst, it's deplorable. And because these were open focus groups and open interviews, I enabled the conversation to go where the midwives wanted it to go. And they wanted to talk about maternity assessment or triage. Now, the second theme I identified was formulaic discourse as a form of self-protection. And there was this thing about conditioned responses. For example, well, you can come in, but if you're not as far on as, you'll have to go home again. And midwives seemed to be providing non-reassuring reassurance. And as Mavis Kirkham would say, that reassurance was more for themselves than it was for the mothers. For example, somebody in the mothers would say that midwives said, well, that's normal. When the mother said, well, I'm feeling this or this, that's normal. You're fine. Have a paracetamol and a bath. I can't tell you how many times that came up in the transcripts. Have a paracetamol and a bath. And Deb Hughes is sitting here at the front row here, wrote an article warning us about the potential harmful effects and links of paracetamol with prostaglandin production. So are we actually causing women to have even longer early latent phase of labor by our very actions? Have a paracetamol. And changing expectations, one midwife said, what happened 20-odd years ago, what happens now is completely different. And it's the reality of practices aren't in step with the expectations that mothers have. Now, I didn't expect us to go here, but one-to-one care in labour came up loudly and clearly. So I asked, is it one-to-one? Is it one to everyone, or is it one to no one? And as you know, the intrapartum care guideline says that we should be providing one-to-one care when women are in active labour, and active labour is described as 4 centimetres dilatation. I would argue that that is not correct. What is 4 centimetres? What does it mean? A woman's in labour when she says she's in labour. So midwives develop a pragmatic approach as a form of self-protection. I can dip in and out and do the care and do the obs. You don't have to stay with a mother. I thought one-to-one care was about staying with a mother. So I felt a bit disconcerted by that. But when midwives, there are not enough midwives on a birth centre or on a labour ward, wherever, then they take a pragmatic approach and do the best that they can. And midwives describe conflicting responsibilities. In thinking about whether or not to admit a woman, a midwife said, it's my registration, and if I let her in, I have to be responsible. So then the question left hanging in the air is, okay, so she's at home and we're not responsible? But her arguments were, well, if I'm already looking after a woman in active labour and I have to stay with her and she comes in, how am I going to provide care for her? How often do I listen into the baby's heartbeat when I actually can't get to her room? It's a real issue. And then this notion of cumulative unreasonableness. After a woman's given birth, it takes about 3 hours before the paperwork is done. And I've certainly experienced that, and I see a few nodding heads out there. So the overall theme that came out here was midwives becoming other, and this notion of consonance, which is creating balance and conforming to what is, or I can't conform, so I'm going to have to get out and leave because I've got this cognitive dissonance which I can't resolve, it's disrupting my life, and I'm out. Just briefly, this diagram shows you the opportunity. We're not always providing continuity of care, but you and I know that when we meet a woman at the labour ward door or the birth centre door, if we smile and welcome and willing to give her a hug and come in and we'll look after you, that makes a huge difference on a mother. And if we purse our lips and are very serious and telling her off and you're wasting our time, then this is not helpful at all. So I'm going to skip that slide briefly, but I think you get the point about fractured relationships. So what is cognitive dissonance theory? It took me a long time to get to this. I had all these themes and sub-themes, but there was something else going on which I couldn't really pin down until I came across cognitive dissonance theory. And cognition refers to the mental process by which external or internal input is transformed, reduced, elaborated, stored, recovered, and used. So cognitive dissonance is a feeling of discomfort which leads to an alienation in one of a previously held attitude or beliefs or behaviours in order to reduce the discomfort and restore the balance. For example, a mother plans a home birth. But for whatever reasons, she has a cesarean section. I don't know if any of you have experienced a mother saying, well, wasn't I stupid, that birth plan? What a ridiculous idea. It was, thank God I had the services so I could have a cesarean section. So she changes her narrative to restore balance for herself. Rightly or wrongly, that often happens. And the same with midwives. If we're too busy and we can't look after the women we want to look after, we can't do the job that we've been trained to do, we'll start to turn that to create some balance. And in order to cope, we say to women, it's better for you. It's normal. It's better for you to stay at home. It's normal for you to stay at home. Now, we don't want all women coming into hospital too soon in labour, of course. We never said women shouldn't be supported. And at the moment, women are being left unsupported. So what's embodied dissonance? They must be right because they know best. So there's your balance, your consonance. I must be wrong. Oh, blimey. Because I know more than them. But I'm still feeling like this, so I'm feeling embodied dissonance. And this quote here, which I'm going to have to skip, really supports the presence of embodied cognition, that your body knows what's right for you, despite what your head or what you're being told. And I've been arguing in my thesis that there are two models at play in midwifery. There's for want of better words, and there may be better words, there's the social model based on the concepts of relationship, and there's the obstetric or industrial model, which is more technocratic, routinized, and task-focused. Yet the findings in my study implicated midwives in both models, so what's going on? The balance is disrupted despite our efforts to provide woman-centered care and despite all the rhetoric. The realities out there for us in practice is often very different. So the dissonance is caused by conflicting paradigms. And one midwife said, I think as well it's going back, but it's kind of, have you VE'd her? Well, no, we're talking about her body. Have you VE'd her? No, we're chatting, and we might have another phone call. What's that mother doing? Have you VE'd her yet? No, we're talking about what's happening to her body. You get my point. Sorry, I'm racing this. And another midwife said, but the trouble is they don't value what we're doing, do they? And I think, and I'm not quite sure who they is. It's about time we value what we're doing. So it's not well for midwives whether they work in birth centres or whether they work on labour ward. And as a lead midwife on labour ward, this midwife found herself in an impossible position. I asked her how it felt, and she replied, it's frustrating, and at times it's frightening. And there have been times when you're down to the last bed on labour ward, and I mean this is absolutely horrendous, down to the last bed and going and waking mothers up at 3 a.m. in the morning and asking if they'd like to go home, because that's what you've been told to do by the managers further up. And that's the reality for some midwives and for some mothers when we're processing women through a system as quickly as we are. So how does it feel to work against your values and beliefs? Crap. I don't want to work like that. I don't want to work like that on a regular basis. You know, there will be days when it happens. That happens on birth centres as well. Well, what does that do to you? Well, the crap makes me feel like I'm a bad midwife, a bad person, and I don't want to do it. Well, it damages you as a person. And a midwife from labour ward said, yeah, there's no job satisfaction at all. You don't feel like you're caring for anybody. You're not doing your role for anybody. You just feel like you're walking around apologising, feeling guilty all the time, and you're not providing the care that you want to give because you can't. You're spread too thinly in the services we currently have, and that's why we want to change them. So by maintaining consonance, midwives become other. They disconnect. Midwives don't want to be unfriendly. They don't want to appear uncaring. But sometimes in order to survive the shift, they have to take those pragmatic and disconnecting approaches in order to carry on and survive. Some people today might call that resilience. But there are other midwives who think, I cannot compromise my values and beliefs any longer. And they're the midwives we lose to our profession. So we do have a problem, and hopefully with better births, we can resolve some of these problems. I'm going to miss that little bit. This diagram, rather complicated one, but it shows you the social model, the obstetric model, but it also really highlights the business model, because we don't often talk about that. Stuff about markets and payment by results, it's there, but it's all kind of a little bit hidden. And the fact is, the NHS is a business, and it is being put out to tender. And we need to be really, really mindful of this as midwives, as what that will mean for maternity services. Because at the moment, I'm arguing that safety is undoubtedly jeopardized. By pulling teams apart, you can be a good, well-functioning, high-functioning labour ward team, and you get pulled apart because there's not enough of you. Or you can be a great team working in the birth centre, those are your values and your beliefs, and then you're asked to cover labour ward, and cover labour ward, and cover labour ward again, until there is no team left. This jeopardized safety. We know what supports safety in practice, but we've got this kind of staffer to work leaner, meaner, smarter, keener, and do more for less. And at the same time, we're going to improve quality. Well, are we? So I'm arguing in this study, I think I've run out of time, haven't I, Sue, that this study indicates that both the social and obstetric midwifery models, there are barriers to affecting consistent, satisfactory care in terms of emotional as well as physical well-being, situated as midwives and mothers are within outmoded organizational structures. So if you want to know why better births is so important and why changing childbirth was so important in '93, some of us are getting older, but we've spent our whole careers championing changing childbirth. And now you new midwives in the audience who've got your career ahead of you, don't be depressed by findings such as mine. You have to pick up the baton and you're going to move forward and make sure that we do get to implement better births. And if you want to understand a little more about the maternity crisis, I want to put this book up for you to see. It's called Untangling the Maternity Crisis. There is a chapter in that written by myself, but principally it's edited by Nadine Edwards, Rosemary Mander, and Joe Murphy-Lawless. And this will talk about the politics behind where we are. And it's a great read. It's not a hard read, and I would strongly recommend it. It's out in March. So thanks for listening. Any questions, welcome. And I do have a paper that's just come out in Midwifery. So if you would like to access that paper, if you just jot down my email, send me an email, I'll email you back with the link to my article. And at the moment, you can download it straight away. It's a limited time period, but there's an opportunity for you to do that. So thank you very much for listening.